Now, the theme for this session is one that is really dear to my heart. As a graduate student at MIT, I was always taught to look at a country's innovation system through the prism of 5 key stakeholders: large business, policymakers, universities, risk capital providers, and startups. Now, contrary to common belief, our corporates, our universities, and our policymakers have actually made a significant effort to learn from and collaborate with China. UNSW, one of the great universities of the city, has attracted the first ever torch precinct outside of China. Our national innovation and science agenda includes a launchpad in Shanghai. And our state government and federal government agencies have worked really hard to attract the likes of JD.com and Alibaba to establish a presence on the ground in this country. Now, that being said, there's certainly scope to do a lot more across a range of sectors and initiatives. And I can't think of anyone better, Andrea, than you to speak a little bit more about how we can more effectively collaborate with China, given CAMP is a world-first bilateral innovation cross-cultural leadership program. Now, Andrea, you've been quoted as saying that what would have happened if Jack Ma and Mark Zuckerberg first met when they were 20? What might they have created? What inspired you to establish CAMP, and what are its objectives?
Well, thank you so much for having me advance, and thank you so much for that glowing introduction. What inspired me to create Australia's largest accelerator connecting innovation ecosystems in China and Australia was essentially a sense of frustration. I'd been a young student studying Mandarin over in China. I was lucky and silly enough to do that twice via 2 postgraduate degrees. And I found that I came back to Australia and I thought I was great, but I didn't necessarily find that the business community, thought that I could be as valuable as I knew that I could be. And I saw a lot of my friends as well actually going through a similar sort of, mind scramble that happens in that way. You really understand the value proposition, if you've stood in the center of China in the 21st century, and all you want to do is share that back with Australia. And then arriving back here and saying, no, listen, I want to insist on just working and using my China skills, my language skills, my amazing networks to actually trust me because I've lived there. And then finding that was sort of falling on somewhat deaf ears sometimes here. So for me, people say that, like passion is the ultimate renewable energy resource. But for me, it's frustration. It's not passion. I'm very passionate about China. That keeps me renewed there. But, when it comes to doing something like CAMP, I'm absolutely powered by frustration. Taking a look at the status quo and going, these guys, on the one hand, do great. On the other hand, I think we're dropping the ball for the next generation, and it's one thing to continue to write op-eds about this. There's more students studying Latin than there is Mandarin for the HSC, yada, yada, yada. It's way more fun to do something about it, and then people can argue with your success. So, we got a bunch of young people who had studied, bilaterally together, and, one of our co-founders, Rachel Walters, we studied Chinese over in Kunming, right from our Ni Hao Ma's straight through to, to being pretty good. So, having those longer-term relationships with each of our co-founders. Our co-founding team are 5 women, which I'm slightly excited about. An innovation program co-founded by 5 women. Oh my God. And we're bilingual, we're bilateral, and some of us are bicultural. I wouldn't necessarily put myself in that box, although I do try my best. So really, there's a gap, there's an opportunity, and we just weren't willing to really stand by and watch that, fade away, or to watch other nations, do better than us. We're really proud of the strengths that Australia has, and I know my sort of personal driver. I come from a working class background. My parents have still never been overseas. They don't have passports, and certainly my grandparents, and no one's gone anywhere since they came over as convicts. So it was really wild. It was really wild to be that first generation professional, first generation of kids who were able to entertain even going anywhere outside of Australia. So of course I picked China because I thought I was going to get one shot at going overseas in my entire life. That hasn't been the case. The whole world changed, in the past 20 years. But I was really worried that I was going to get this kind of one shot at the title. So I chose China and subsequently fell in love. But what drives me is that there's a lot of working class kids out there. There's a lot of regional kids out there who, if they picked up Mandarin or if they had some China skills, they could watch their careers take off just like mine did. I've gone from being a bit of a troublemaker in regional New South Wales to having an extraordinary career where I've gone over to China with Julia Gillard, et cetera, et cetera. So it's about getting the right skill set at the right moment in time for the needs of that economy, and certainly China skills are what we need, so we created a program around it.
And so, Andrea, CAMP, as I understand it, brings together teams that include 5 Chinese entrepreneurs and 5 Australian entrepreneurs typically put together in a single team. And last year you had about 13 such teams. I'm keen to get your thoughts on the so-called significant cultural divide and the business cultures between the two countries, which in the mainstream discussion is often overplayed through stereotypes. But given that CAMP is all focused on millennials, do you see that there is a divide, or do you actually see commonalities at play?
That's a really good question. So within CAMP, it's a 100-day design sprint program for 150 people. And 50% of the cohort are from China and 50% of the cohort are from Australia. 50% of the cohort are also female, by the way, because we're not going to lead anything that doesn't put women in the face of the innovation agenda, right? So there's a lot of diversity within this group of people. People come from all across China and all across Australia. So, we have regional diversity, we have gender diversity, we have class diversity, we have cultural diversity. There is so much within this, but as we all probably know here, diversity is the engine of innovation. And, if I see a team of, 4 white guys heading up an innovation program, I just call that thinking about something rather than innovation. And it's fun, like creating a diverse playground where you're inviting people to play around with those differences and explore and, be really curious about each other. It can be pretty great if you frame it in the right way. I think one part of the program which has assisted is that it is a millennial, 18 to 35-year-old based program. So people have the commonality of being at a similar stage of life. So, people can identify with each other, sort of irrespective of these different intersectionalities that we might have. They're very social media savvy. They can collaborate across borders. It's no big deal to have friends who aren't necessarily born where you're born, et cetera, et cetera. Or even, speak with an accent, speak a couple of different languages that you don't speak. So the comfort level of this new wave of a younger generation who has grown up global and certainly grown up within a globalized world means that they're actually excellently placed to be problem solvers in a global context where not only do we have this fabulous globalized economy that we're all getting a bit more excited about now, but they've grown up in a context where problems are also globalized now. So you can have a mosquito bite somebody 10,000 miles away, and that's a problem here. Or a cow or a chicken can feel unwell in the UK or in China, and that's a problem here. So if you're going to tackle global problems, you need to be able to collaborate across borders because the solutions are no longer able to be discovered by just one country or affected by just one country. So we have a new generation of people who are young, connected, have a propensity to want to get stuck in and help. So when you get these people together, even though they're from China and they're from Australia, actually they have far more shared value in common than they might do with, a fellow countryman, just down the street who, might not quite have the same sort of shared perspective. So we find that it actually works pretty well. And in addition to being strategic and important, it's also a great deal of fun. And the guys become friends, and they become trusted allies. I think that underneath everything, yes, we create new businesses out of this project, but actually we're a trust accelerator. 100 days, you can go from being complete strangers to having a trusted network. I think from there you can create any sort of great research, business, you name it, but trust is that underlying component, which I'm very happy about creating.
And Andrew, just building on that a little bit, how can Australia play to its strengths in what is an extremely crowded market in China? And CAMP's been able to do that, to seek out its own little space.
I think there's sort of two things there. When we talk about Australia's strengths, there's the strengths that Australia, that we think we have, and then there's the strengths that other people think we have. And they can be completely different things. So, for example, here in New South Wales, we're often talking about ourselves as this, fantastic fintech hub in the Asia Pacific, whereas over in China, we're really known for our lifestyle. We're really known as a tourist destination, as an education destination. We're also known for, transporting a lot of very valuable dirt over to China. So, when we're thinking about how to really utilize what our strengths are, it doesn't just come down to that technical piece. It also comes down to brand Australia and how you can leverage that. So if you're doing something which is, say, focused on fintech, well, how might you leverage the goodwill around brand Australia, when it comes to us being clean, green, stable, safe, and really leveraging, what is almost a stereotype about us.
Thank you, Andrea, for those really rich insights. Kee, you've been a serial entrepreneur in the region, and also as the chair of the AIIA, you represent the interests of the largest technology and telecom players in the country. What are some of the patterns you're seeing around the adoption of technologies in China versus the West?
It's a broad topic, and I'm told we've got 2 or 3 minutes, so I'm trying to distill it into that time frame. Well, I think I would say that China 20 years ago is a very different place to today, and a lot of it has to do with scale and speed. I think one of the things that China do have is size, and size matters in that context, and the hunger for success. And I'm Chinese by origin, and I think Chinese people naturally are very entrepreneurial in their mindset. So given the opportunity and the mindset, and given the size and the scale, China's adoption of technology has been unprecedented. The Chinese global giants are now competing on a global stage. And they started off by leveraging on their own internal consumption. So earlier on, when David was talking about Australia's size, yes, we are 24 million, maybe half of that is the employment numbers we have. We actually have to look at it from a very different perspective. So for us to create success at a global stage, we can't create local success as a starting point. We actually have to look at our neighbors as a marketplace for us to create a stage by which we can then compete globally. China, on the other hand, can rely completely on their local marketplace to refine, to develop their product and services, and then they look at the global stage beyond that. But I think there's a lot of Chinese businesses now starts global, right? And then when you have a few global names backing some of the people who are now coming on board, they automatically get that platform at a global level, which gives them even more the X factor, if you want to call it that way. So China is a country to be reckoned with, and more so, right, moving forward.
And Kee, can you expand on that just a little bit in terms of some of those comparative technologies out of China versus the West?
So we just look at some of the sort of comparison. If you look at, for example, Uber has started and become a global player. Uber in China still doesn't get the traction. So you have the two giants, Tencent and Alibaba, starting TT and Kuaiti, and they were competing amongst each other for the local marketplace. And then somewhere along the track, they say, hang on, maybe we should just come together and form TT Kuaiti. And when you get Tencent, who's got a startup in terms of the social networking QQ and now WeChat, which is now very much competing more successfully in the Asian marketplace rather than in the Western marketplace, again, WhatsApp. When you have somebody like Tencent and Alibaba coming together and relying again on developing a presence in the local marketplace first, which is huge by anyone's standard. When they get that right, and they get the functionality and the user base right, and more Chinese are now expats in overseas country, that network effect is just going to create them their global presence that it's very hard to compete against.
That's a great example, Kee, because as that played out, Uber merged with Didi and ended up with a less than 20% stake in the merged entity.
Yeah.
Quite extraordinary.
Yeah.
Looking a little bit into the work of the AIIA and your work with partners in China and the region, could you expand on that a little bit?
Well, I think AIIA has been the peak body for technology industry in Australia, and for a long time, we have always been a club of suppliers to the industry. And whilst Australia is a small country, we are not small in terms of the way we and how quickly we adopt technology to drive business efficiency and productivity. So Australia is great in terms of applying and adopting technology. We're just not so great in terms of creating them. And certainly our stats, comparatively speaking, when we talk about creating a global marketplace where we do exports, we are actually far behind in terms of our capability. Part of that is because half of the industry is not suppliers. Half of the industry is actually people who are actually consuming it. So, for example, if we think about areas such as cybersecurity, some of the best players in the cybersecurity space are actually people who need it most. So, for example, the financial institutions, the banks actually has got more expertise in cybersecurity than some of the people who are supplying to them. So, what we've done at AIIA is to realize that moving forward, we can't just represent the club of suppliers. So, the board of AIIA in the last couple of years have been strategizing and now have come to an agreed position that AIIA moving forward should represent the whole ecosystem. Now, that's going to be a huge transformation in terms of how we actually organize ourselves, how we actually provide value proposition to the whole ecosystem, but it should include the people who invest in it, the people who actually buy and consume it, and the people who actually educate and produce the talent and skills that will come into the workforce around it, and certainly the people who would be actually setting policies around how to develop the industry. So over time, you start to see that AIIA now will include people from government, from the user community, from the universities, research organization, and the institution that actually invest in that industry.
And Kee, what are 2 or 3 Asian-based organizations that the AIIA has worked with which have had an influence on those policies?
Well, I think so AIIA has been a long time member of a global organization called WITSA, which is the World IT and Services Alliance, and also an organization around the Asia-Pacific region called Associo. Those organizations are actually lagging behind in terms of how we're thinking we need to set up. They are pretty much, again, associations representing the supply side of the industry. Our realization is actually looking at certain areas closer to our home where you have examples of the ecosystem being embraced. So if we look further north in Singapore, it has an advantage of a city-state. It has an advantage of a long-term government which doesn't chop and change its policy around election cycles. So they can plan long-term and bring the whole ecosystem into play. So you think about how you need to have long-term strategy about skills development. So if we ask ourselves, most of the senior execs around businesses, what is number one issue that keeps the CEOs and the management team awake at night? It's actually lack of skills, lack of acquisition or access to the right skill sets they need. And as we start developing our horizon to beyond just the shores of our continent in terms of competitiveness globally, then I think we need to have skill sets that are quite globally savvy. And so if you look at examples, as you asked me, you need to look at examples where countries have prospered well in terms of understanding. Number one, you need good talent. Either you grow them or you have a means of attracting people to want to come and reside in those countries for long term. And then you also need to have the right ecosystem where the investment community understands how to invest in a particular industry and taking the risks. And also you have to have people who have patient capital. So some of these things take a longer time horizon to come to fruition, and others have a shorter time frame. And then you need to have businesses that are savvy enough to be able to compete globally. So I always say that when in Australia, when we talk about global competition, most people think that we need to be globally competitive by looking at markets outside of Australia. Most of the SMB businesses in Australia are now competing globally in their own backyard because global companies come into the marketplace and compete with them. So when we think about global competitiveness, it's no longer about just you thinking you want to take your product overseas. It's about global companies coming into your backyard and now taking your lunch away from you.
Thanks, Kee. Well, in the interest of time, we might need to close the panel session there, but can I please thank Andrea for using passion and frustration as a source of renewable energy, and for very refreshingly using an expanded definition of diversity in regional diversity, gender diversity, and cultural diversity, which unfortunately isn't as widely adopted in this country. So
thank you.
Thank you, Andrea.
Thank you so much.
And Keith, thank you as well for sharing that really powerful example regarding Uber and Didi, which I think is just so crucial. A lot like WeChat and WhatsApp, a lot of people don't realize the scale and the difference in features that WeChat brings that makes WhatsApp just so basic, and I know we've spoken about that. Yeah. So congratulations on all your successes with the AWA.
Yeah.
Please join me in thanking Andrea and Kee.
Thank you.